morning. I'm also staff for today's event. Before we begin, I would like to bring your attention to a couple of housekeeping items. First, we will have an all-day break service for you located in the back of the room. We will also have lunch about 12:30. You'll exit these doors, walk around, and it will be along this wall on the other side. And then we will also have a couple breaks throughout the day. We have a reception that will begin right at 5 p.m. after our last speaker. That will be right out here in the Emerging Issues Commons. Restrooms are located just across the hall by the elevators. And please note that we have free Wi-Fi access here. Just select NCSU guest from among your choices. For those of you that tweet, which as of last Friday, I now do, you can follow me. Please share your thoughts using the hashtag shown on the screen. I think it's also listed on your tech handout on your table. We have an exciting day ahead planned for you. It is my pleasure to begin the Science Summit by inviting Chancellor Measer and Dean Godfrey to the stage. Chancellor Measer is a UNC Chapel Hill Chancellor Emeritus and Chair of the North Carolina Festival. And Dean Godfrey is a Joseph D. Moore Distinguished University Professor, Dean of the College of Textiles, and Chair of the North Carolina Board of Science and Technology.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure as a Chancellor Emeritus at UNC to welcome you to NC State. And in fact, I want to say to my colleagues at NC State, you have done a really exceptional thing with this library and building. It's a phenomenal piece of architecture, and I salute you for it. It's beautiful, and I know it's a building of real distinction, and I couldn't be. I can't say enough good things about it, and I can't wait to really experience it on the inside. So I'm here actually in my role as chair of the Science Festival Advisory Board. This is, as Sarah said, the signal event of the North Carolina Science Festival, which we began in 2010 at the Moorhead Planetarium and Science Center at UNC to celebrate the importance of science, technology, engineering, and math in North Carolina. But this is not, and I emphasize this is not a Chapel Hill or a UNC event. It's not, because this really is something that is so important, in my view, that we have to really bring us all together. So it's not an NC State or a UNC. It's not even a UNC system thing, because we've got the community colleges, we've got the whole educational establishment. We need to involve every school district across this state in this pivotal issue of STEM for this state. It's not a partisan issue. We need to come together, Republicans and Democrats. This is something that should rise above partisanship. So, a little bit about the Science Festival. Over 500 events scheduled during this 2 weeks in April. The 2013 Science Festival will reach 300,000 North Carolinians in meetings, lectures, lab tours, science nights, and many other kinds of activities this month. Our goal ultimately is to reach up 1 million. We want to have a science festival event within 30 minutes of every person in this state, because our goal is really to raise the level of consciousness about STEM, to make North Carolina a leading state, to make America competitive in the world. It's no less of an issue than that. So I'm pleased to serve as the chair of this board. I had a great deal of fun as chancellor at UNC, but I'm having a great deal of fun now helping with things like this, which I think are really important for the future of the state. We're running behind, so I'm going to be very brief. I intend to stay here for the day. I think what we're doing today is important, and I thank you for your participation in it.
I'm also pleased to add my welcome. My earliest memories were working with my father, a poultry geneticist, catching chickens, weighing them, holding them still so we could take blood out of the wings and put it on a little glass slide, and trying to understand what was really happening in heredity. Today, our focus is on the economic impact of science and technology, competing globally, innovation, and understanding the critical role of science and technology in the quality of life for all in North Carolina. Understanding this role and continually exploring new ways for science and technology to positively impact all of our lives is the job of the North Carolina Board of Science and Technology, whose mission is to improve the well-being and quality of life of all North Carolinians through advancing science, technology, and innovation. The board only studies and makes recommendations. The real work, of course, is done by the governor, members of the General Assembly, and business and government leaders throughout the state. Although I've served on this board almost 10 years, it was only last year where under John Hardin's leadership, the board put together a history of what it had actually done, and I began to understand its impact. The board proposed and advocated for the North Carolina School of Science and Math, the MCNC, the North Carolina Biotechnology Center, created initiatives for the NC Information Highway, the NC Science and Math Alliance, and Vision 2030, and in the past 10 years developed and administered the North Carolina Technology Commercialization Grant Program. And although our focus today is on the economic impact of science, technology, and innovation, I hope we never, ever forget the fascination of science. I spent my first 14 years in my professional life at Bell Labs. The fascination and excitement of going to work each day, working with scientists and engineers and developing lasers and light fibers and satellite communications and high-speed data networks, and the wonderful celebration when our vice president, who almost accidentally discovered the 3 degrees above zero, confirming the Big Bang Theory, brought another Nobel Prize to the labs. My favorite bedside reading is still physics. Kaku's Physics of the Impossible, Lightman's Einstein's Dreams, Hawking's Brief History of Time, and even a wonderful little paperback book, Packing for Mars, which seems like science fiction, and then I meet people who are actually working in the labs doing this. For many, many years, North Carolina has been blessed with a wonderful state fair, celebrating the past, present, and future of agriculture in this state. I congratulate those who have created this science festival and their wonderful dream of having more people attend it every year than attend the state fair. 300,000 is a good start, Chancellor Meeser, and we hope you hit your $1.5 million. Congratulations.
Thank you, gentlemen. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you Anita Brown Graham, Director of the Institute for Emerging Issues.
Good morning. Well, now that we no longer have Hostess Twinkies and therefore can't have fried Hostess Twinkies, maybe you will beat out the state fair after all. It is really my pleasure to be with you this morning. As Chancellor Meeser said, it's an exciting day. It's an exciting day for the Science Festival Board. It's an exciting day for all of the partners. And my chore this morning is really just to welcome you on behalf of the Institute for Emerging Issues and to say thank you at the outset to a couple of folks. So let me start with our sponsors, because this was one of those efforts where we started with a great idea, recognized that it might take some resources, and began to build the plane before we had secured the mortgage for it. So there are some folks sitting in this room who I hope you will take the time to thank this morning. We really could not have pulled this off without the great support of the North Carolina State University College of Sciences, the North Carolina Science, Mathematics, and Technology Education Center, Biogen IDEC, IES, our great friends, AT&T, the Keenan Institute, UNC, you can read the sponsors yourself. Say thank you to them, please. This all... It's important to recognize, however, that the real specialness of this moment comes from a process of sweat equity on 26 partners who came together to make this happen. I'll tell you that this weekend I was in Chicago, and Sarah can attest, was getting emails from lots of people who were hearing about the Science Summit for the first time, and we're all going, well, why weren't we invited to the party? Why weren't we in the club? And it gave me great pleasure to be able to tap back. This is all volunteer. Had you raised your hand, you would have been invited to the party. So kudos to the 26 organizations that came together and worked together in a really hefty partnership to make the Science Summit possible. Let me ask you to give yourselves a hand in this room. And then, before I go on, I have to say a special thank you to my colleague Sarah Langer, who sort of inherited this project from a former colleague, and she has jumped in and handled all of it with such grace and skill. I'm sure every one of the partners in here recognizes, but for Sarah, we would not be standing here this morning. Sarah. There'll be a lot more to say later this afternoon, and I'll be back to do that, to talk about the days ahead. I did promise all the people who emailed me this weekend that the partnership would be in conversation after this first Science Summit to talk about how we really institutionalize what I presume people will walk out of here today thinking is something that ought to continue into the future. Looking forward to that. I'm also looking forward to having our board chair, Governor Hunt, join us later today. I have to tell you, he is the worst employee I have on the staff. I told him to be here at 8:30, but since I can't dock his pay, it's a little hard to get him under control. I'm sure Governor Hunt is looking forward to being here as soon as he can this morning. With that, I want to get out of the way because our first speaker is someone I met during our work in the Emerging Issues Forum at Manufacturing Works. She is an awesome partner and leader, and I am very excited to have her with us this morning. Carlos, I'm going to give you the privilege of coming up and introducing Secretary Decker to this group. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Anita, for that introduction. I'm very excited today about this event and about introducing our next speaker, especially in this magnificent space. I'm a very proud board member of the Institute for Emerging Issues, so I saw the designs early of the Home Library and the Commons, and then we came here a couple of times to see the progress of the construction, but I never imagined, I knew it was going to be a great place, but I never imagined it was going to be such a magnificent space. So it's mind-boggling, so it's just an incredible home for the Institute for Emerging Issues and for the library at NC State. And it is very fitting that this seminar, this forum is being hosted here today. As you know, with science, we can change, we can do great things, and we can revolutionize society. I see it every day at my company, at AT&T. We have a lot of technology that we introduce every day. We have 2 patents a day. I mean, that is the average at AT&T, 2 patents per day. So over 2,000 scientists at the Bell Labs and several Nobel Prizes in the history of AT&T. So we're excited about sponsoring this event, and I'm very pleased to introduce our next speaker, someone who has been a trailblazer in the Piedmont area and the western parts of the state, and now as our statewide leader in commerce and economic development. Sharon Decker was appointed Secretary of Commerce by Governor Pat McCrory in January 2013. She brings more than 30 years of experience in business and commerce to the position. After graduating summa cum laude from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, Decker spent more than 17 years with Duke Power Company, now Duke Energy. She began with the company in consumer services and moved rapidly through the ranks to become the youngest and first female vice president at Duke Power's history. Her work at Duke Power led to the creation of its 24-hour customer service center, an organization that still serves as a model for the industry. Decker left Duke Power as Chief Communications Officer to become the founding president of the Linwood Foundation, which was created to restore the Duke Mansion in Charlotte as a conference center and to begin the William Stately Leadership Institute. While at Linwood in 1998, she also served as the chair of the Charlotte Chamber and was named Charlotte Woman of the Year. She moved to Rutherfordton in 1999 to serve as president of the Doncaster division of Tanner Companies. Now, this next part is really, really incredible. In 2004, she created and served as the CEO of the Tapestry Group, a nonprofit that helps individuals lead healthy lives in body, mind, and spirit. In addition to her work with Tapestry, Decker is wife to her husband, Bob, a mother of 4, a lay pastor in the Presbyterian Church USA, and a student at the Christopher White School of Divinity, completing her Master of Divinity degree with a concentration in spiritual formation. She completed an internship last year as Director of Graduate Ministries for the Center for Christian Study in Charlottesville, Virginia, where she served as chaplain to students at the Darden School of Business and the UVA School of Law. She remains a member of the board of the Center for Christian Study. Decker has served on the boards of 3 Fortune 500 companies. Please help me welcome Secretary Decker.
Good morning. I am often asked after an introduction like that, what is a lay pastor doing as Secretary of Commerce? And I said the most important skill I've learned I need is prayer. So I've had training in that regard, and it's coming in handy. Good morning to you. I was so excited to be asked to participate in the summit today. Congratulations to those of you who have been in the preparatory and formative stages of this event. How important it is to be focused on the issues of science and technology in our state, and how important is your work to economic development in North Carolina. When John Harden approached me about doing this, I said absolutely, and I'm so glad that John is with me, my colleague in commerce, focused on science and technology, a critically important part to economic growth here. So I'm excited to be a part of this morning. You know, throughout history, science and technology have been the foundation of our society and of civilization. New ways of shaping and arranging and making and combining matter have brought about the development of tools, of processes, of systems and services, things like the wheel and sailing ships, the plow, water and sewer systems, the combustible engine, medicines, the telegraph, and the list could go on and on. And I know none of us can imagine living without any of these products and systems in our world today. And in just a few years' time, we all won't be able to remember a time when we had anything but LED light bulbs developed by Cree in Durham, or vaccines and medicines from soybeans developed by SoyMed in Charlotte, lighter fishing poles made with nanotubes developed by Nanotech Labs in Yadkinville, and solar panels manufactured by Simprius in Henderson. These North Carolina-based companies are doing amazing work, and so many more as they study science and technology and research every day for new and very important possibilities and new products that make our lives easier and simpler and more economical. And they've become second nature to how we operate in our households, our businesses, and in generations to come. Just last night, I had dinner with a prospective company that has a small operation in the Triangle who's considering moving all of their operations from the state of California. Can't imagine why they would want to do that. And as we sat at the table and talked about it, a medical device company, very successful and growing very rapidly, talked about the research and what a joy it was, an honor it was for me to be able to talk about the opportunity in this university network in North Carolina and how we could support their business and the research that they need to continue to do to develop their products. It was exciting for them to learn for the first time about that. And he said, you know, I guess we have those kinds of opportunities for collaboration and partnership in California, but we've really never taken advantage of that. And how exciting it was to sit at the table with him, with our partners, and talk about how that's just the way we do business in North Carolina. With our friends that were there from the Biotech Center, friends there from the community college system, to talk about how our effort and our intention was to support their success in North Carolina. So we're so really blessed in this state to have so many key industries in North Carolina that are heavily invested in science and technology. And the good news, I think, is that there's much more opportunity in that regard to come. We've got leaders in advanced manufacturing and aerospace and aviation and defense, automotive, biotech, pharmaceuticals, green and sustainable energy, financial services, software and information technology, as well as textiles that are benefiting from science and technology and fueling our overall economy. In order for us to support those businesses and help them succeed, we've got to change the way we do things in North Carolina from my perspective. And the first thing, and you know it better than I, is education. We've got to do more to ensure we're preparing our students for this new economy, an economy that is based and centered on science and technology. I want to give a shout out to the Northeast Regional School of Biotechnology and Agri-Science that's in Plymouth, North Carolina, the metropolis, which is going to be growing because of their great work, which aims to be a statewide model for STEM instruction. Students spend time at the North Carolina Department of Agriculture, at their Tidewater Research Station, experiencing hands-on learning in the woodlands, in pastures, and croplands, and aquaculture. I know there are similar STEM events and efforts going on all over North Carolina. I read about them in my own home county of Rutherford County. It's urgent that we increase our focus on STEM education, STEM literacy, and STEM expertise. A focus on STEM needs to be a part of our economic development plans as well. I want to applaud Sam Houston and the folks working with him and the North Carolina Science, Math, and Technology Education Center for the work that they're doing on developing the North Carolina STEM scorecard. I think this is critically important to us, Sam, and appreciate the work that you are doing. I know you'll be learning from him later today, but I want to say that I'm excited about the possibility of what this tool can offer. And I know it will help us develop a way to measure STEM literacy in this state and our expertise as we move forward in restructuring how we do economic development in North Carolina. I think it's important as we are recruiting companies and talking with companies about expanding in North Carolina that we have a measurable way to show them we are making progress in this regard and that we're developing the workforce we need. You know, as I talk with companies about why they have settled in North Carolina, why they're growing here, there are really two things that they say very consistently. They'll say things like it was economical to do business here, it was important that there were some investments that you made in our company and in the process of getting us here, but two things consistently. And one is always people. They come to North Carolina and they see the opportunity for a developed workforce and a trainable workforce, and they get very, very excited about that because more often than not, one of the primary drivers of their relocating is the fact they can't get a skilled workforce. So they see that potential in North Carolina. As we can better measure that potential and that preparedness is an even better selling card for us. But the second thing they say to us is, we like it there. We like it. It's a nice place. We like the people. We like the geography. We like the climate. We like the fact you can get to the mountains and the beach and eat with ease. We like it here. It is that sense of community. And a lot of that has to do with that collaborative nature of business and education and community that is so typified in North Carolina. So what you're doing is important in helping us recruit business. As I talk around the state about my philosophy of economic growth in North Carolina, I go back to a model that was developed in the 60s, really the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and some of us in this room are old enough to remember that, in a community development model, a community redevelopment model that really shaped the North Carolina that you and I have benefited from in our growing and developing years. Because I think at the core, it's where we have to return to define how North Carolina will grow exponentially. And I think that's the opportunity that we have. And I define them as the 5 tenets of economic growth for North Carolina, none more important than the other, but all critically important to develop as we move forward. And the first tenet of economic growth in North Carolina is health. I contend that every North Carolinian deserves to live a healthy life. Now, not every North Carolinian will choose to live one. And there have been phases of my life where I didn't make that choice. I hope I'm doing a little better these days. But health is important. So access to health care, you have something to do with preparing students for careers in health care. And having access to health care, having healthy communities, having clean water, having clean air, all areas of our culture that you impact in the work that you do in science and technology is critical to the health of North Carolina. Probably one of the most important things we can give to prospective employers in this state is healthy employees. Don't forget that. Number 2 is education. Education is critically important, and you play a critical role in that process. As I mentioned, STEM education, increasingly important in this climate and in this culture, but it starts in our homes. I am so grateful for the work of our collaborative children's museums all across this state, the work that Steve Saucier and his counterparts do, to begin to talk with our children about science and technology and math and living it, experiencing it. How many hours did I spend with my youngest daughter in Kids Senses, a little museum in Rutherford County, North Carolina, the rural part of the state. I was just distraught to learn when we moved there from Charlotte that kids couldn't take day trips to Discovery Place in Charlotte. I'm like, that's, 70 miles away. But to rural North Carolina, that 70 miles is sometimes the thing that stands between their science education and not, because you can in a day, and with the cost of travel, get to the places that I was so used to being able to take my kids living in an urban center. And so in rural North Carolina, we need to be talking as strongly about science education as we do in our urban centers. And so we got to think creatively about how to do that. So it was there I learned how tornadoes are formed. And last night, sitting around that table with that medical devices company, he said, I noticed when I went to the restroom today in the building that we visited that there was a tornado drill sign on the back of the toilet. He said, do you have tornadoes here? Well, I recalled my time in Kids Census in the Children's Museum and talked about the history of tornadoes in North Carolina. It's funny how all that comes back to us. But do you get the connection? What we do with our young children, what we do in elementary education, what we do in middle school and high school and on into our community colleges and into our universities is critically important to economic growth in North Carolina. Education is imperative. And we just got to keep focused on this being one of the most important tools to economic growth. I think about the things that have allowed me to be successful, and one of those is my parents and your parents investing in education and research in this state. And we've got to continue to do that. It's a challenging time to set priorities, but education is critically important to us. The third tenet of economic growth in North Carolina, economic development and job creation. And that means recruiting companies to this great state, helping existing companies to grow. It also means creating an environment where small businesses can evolve and grow. I serve on the board of Family Dollar stores, and folks will say to me every once in a while, Sharon, we need to recruit a company like Family Dollar. And I say, remember that Leona Levine started it with one store in Charlotte, North Carolina, because he found an environment where small business could be developed and innovation could happen and grow. That's the kind of culture we've got to have in North Carolina. I think we've got a lot more to do in small business. Every week, there are companies that are sitting in my office, technology companies, who come to us in that mid-tier level. They've done very well for 3 to 5 years. They've got a technology that is emerging, and they need to go to the second stage. They're not at a mezzanine level by any means, but they're in that, what I call middle space, no man's land, and they're reaching out to everybody that breathes to say, can you help me? Do you know those folks? You might be one of them. And I have a great deal of passion for that space in this North Carolina economy, because that's just the kind of opportunity we need to embrace and just the kind of people we need to be growing in this great state. And yet, from a commerce standpoint, we don't really have the tools right now that help them in a big way. And so that's one of the things I think we've got to change. It's one of the things that's driving my passion around reorganizing what we're doing in the State Department of Commerce. We're not positioned to help those kinds of emerging technologies and emerging companies grow. We're doing a lot of work, and it's good work, but we've got to exponentially grow our efforts in that regard. So to do that, I think we have to change the structure and the approach, and we have to leverage much more private investment in this state. We don't have near the venture capital in North Carolina that we ought to. We have a lot of venture capitalists, but they're taking that money other places. So we've got to create the format and the forum which allows them and gives them the encouragement to bring it back home, and we're going to be doing that. So economic development, job creation is important. Also has a lot to do with infrastructure. You also impact preparing students to work in the area of infrastructure, whether it's civil and mechanical engineering or electrical engineering. All of these fields impact how infrastructure will grow in the state. I'm excited about what Secretary Tata is looking at relative to transportation in North Carolina. I think we've got the opportunity to look at it very differently, from our ports, from our trains to our roads, and saying comprehensively, how do we move people and products faster and more efficiently? Economic development is important. Fourth, I would say, is arts, culture, and tourism. Again, tourism, a big part of North Carolina's economy, and sometimes we overlook its importance. But no less important than economic development is tourism itself, arts and culture in this community. You're engaged there as well. It's not independent of science and technology. It's integrated in it. If I have seen anything evolve in our little community, Steve, I can't help but think about all the geocachers that I see walking down Main Street, walking into light poles as they are using their technology, and it's all about experience, right? And so that's a simple idea, but you see where technology and tourism and personal experience merge. It's important to the economic health of North Carolina. Over 200,000 jobs in this state come in tourism itself. and a lot of that has to do with science and culture. I get excited when I wake up in the morning in Rutherford County. I am looking out my front window at Chimney Rock. And if there ever was an opportunity to think about the whole engagement of science and technology and God's natural earth, and it happens in our state parks, it happens in tourism. And the fifth one that's very important to you, quality of life and the environment. We cannot grow this state and forsake or become poor stewards of the thing that has made us successful, probably most centered made us successful, and that's the pure environment and geography of the great state of North Carolina. We are gifted with oceans and mountains and flatlands and sand hills, a central park right in the middle of the state with that Yadkin River Valley. It's an amazing state, from east to west and north to south, and we've got to be sure that we protect it as we grow and we expand this economy. Critically important to us. One of the key areas we will grow is through advanced manufacturing, through agribusiness, through the development of small business, all which have choices about how they grow and how they impact this environment. It will be my intention as I lead our efforts in economic growth to ensure that we protect this environment, which is so very precious to us. And also the quality of life, that fifth tenet, is paired with environment. Again, when folks come to North Carolina, most of them say they come because they like it here. As we sat with the CEO last night, it was very interesting. It all started about the dollars and cents, dollars and cents, dollars and cents. And after we kind of got through that, I said, what is it that you're really looking for? And he said, we want to be known as one of the best employers in the country. And I said, well, how do you define that? And it had nothing to do with the dollars and cents. They've got to be profitable, so that's very important. Please don't misunderstand me. But he said, you know, it's about a way of life. And we want to be in a place where our employees love being, where they can be successful, where they continue to grow and to be educated, and where we can find a home that we can live in for a lifetime. That sounds like North Carolina to me. I appreciate your contribution to this great state. I want you to understand that from my perspective, what you're doing is critically important to North Carolina now, and most important to North Carolina in the future. It's not smoke and mirrors that you're involved in. It's hard fact. Education of our children is helping them be better prepared for their futures. The most important thing that we can do as we prepare North Carolina for growth is to prepare our children, so that as they are educated, they will choose and have the opportunity to live right here in North Carolina and to continue to contribute to it. 5 tenets for economic growth in this state: health, education, economic development, arts, culture, and tourism, quality of life and environment. There's not a tenet there that you do not touch. You're critical to every bit of it. In fact, I would say that the work that you do is foundational to it. Keep up the good work. I look forward to being your partner in the process. North Carolina is in a renaissance, and I'm excited that you are a part of that. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Secretary Decker. I like it here too. I came down in 2001 and I like it, and I'm deciding to stay. So thank you very much. So throughout the morning, you will see a series of video snapshots chosen by the Pathways Partnership to highlight some of the good work going on across the state in each of our 4 key challenge areas. And those are actually listed in your program, and we'll go into detail with what those are later today. Before we get started, just a housekeeping. Can folks on this side of the room see the screen okay with the shades down? Okay, great. So this key challenge: how do we graduate college and career-ready students at all levels that can navigate the science and technology pipeline? Here is a video snapshot of Anson New Tech High School.
The biggest difference in teaching in a new tech school versus a traditional school is the methodology of it. The best hope for me in my classroom is, if I'm doing project-based learning correctly, is the students are going to direct their own learning, and then they're going to be internally motivated and excited to then figure out the content that I ultimately need them to learn. And so it very much is student-centered learning rather than teacher-centered learning.
I'm a collaborative, more hands-on person. It's unique. You don't do this in regular schools. I mean, it's motivational. It just keeps me going, and I love coming to school and working with my friends and complete a goal. That's what pushes me through it.
You know, our students are from a rural community, so the obstacles of this community are lack of job opportunity, welfare, poverty, lack of belief, you know, a mindset of failure. stereotyped that we're not expected to do well. And so when you provide these opportunities and they begin to realize that they can compete in the larger global economy, then they start getting them excited. And here it's almost open office business environment. What we're guaranteeing our students to be able to represent are work ethic, collaboration, critical thinking, technology literacy. So we ultimately want them to be able to adapt and work in the real working world.
I plan on going to college to become a pediatrician. They actually help you get into a college, and if you're not sure about what you want to do, they sit down and talk to you and help you plan out your future.
We really strive to integrate ourselves into the community and provide for what the community needs.
When I sit down with economic developers, that businesses are saying they don't have a workforce that is able to sustain us, so therefore we're going to leave or move, or we're not coming. And so we have to develop enough graduates that are going off to school to be educated, to where business wants to develop here, and then we have a workforce that's able to come back and be those engineers and be those small business developers and be those marketing agents. And what I see is that when given the opportunity and provided expectations and structure, these students begin to rise up to the expectation. And so last year was our first graduating class, and 100% of them graduated, and every one of them was accepted to a post-secondary education.
Now I would like to invite Phil Mintz, Assistant Director of Industrial Extension Service at NC State University, to introduce our national keynote speaker. I know I can speak for the other members of the partnership in saying how very excited we are to have IES as a member organization. And I will leave it to Phil to share a few words about the good work going on for manufacturers across the state. Thank you.
Good morning. As the Assistant Director of the Industrial Extension Service here at NC State University, we're often hidden away in the vast College of Engineering here at the school. But our work includes engaging businesses and organizations across the state of North Carolina and beyond with assessments, training, and projects to improve their performance and competitiveness. I'm also the Director of the North Carolina Manufacturing Extension Partnership, which is the state affiliate of the National Institute of Standards and Technology's Federal Manufacturing Growth Program, or MEP. Under our MEP mission, the IES specialists and program partners across the state work daily on business impact projects with small to medium-sized manufacturers in support of their long-term profitable growth through innovation, quality improvements, and process optimization strategies. IES is really pleased to be a member of the North Carolina Pathways Partnerships and a sponsor of the Summit. But I'm personally pleased to introduce our national keynote speaker. To say that Craig Giffey has a global perspective on manufacturing competitiveness is perhaps somewhat of an understatement. As a Vice Chairman and leader for Deloitte LLP U.S. Consumer and Industrial Products Industry Practice and leader of the firm's Global Manufacturing Competitiveness Initiative, Craig has had the opportunity to interview CEOs, university presidents, national lab leaders, policymakers, and labor leaders to understand what drivers create a competitive advantage for companies and countries. The research efforts Craig has led on behalf of Deloitte has included collaborations with the U.S. Council on Competitiveness, the World Economic Forum, and the Manufacturing Institute. The results and recommendations identified through his discussion have been authored in a number of reports that have received critical attention from media and executive leaders worldwide. Craig has presented on this topic to a number of national and international forums, including the United States Congress, the World Economic Forum annual meeting in Switzerland, the G.E. Whitney Symposium, the Global Federation of Council on Competitiveness, the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, and the Aspen Institute. He is a trustee of the Manufacturing Institute, helping to drive thought leadership regarding manufacturing talent, innovation, and contributions to the American economy, and participates as a subject matter expert regarding manufacturing competitiveness with the National Association of Manufacturers on their efforts to shape the debate on the issues impacting manufacturers in the U.S. and worldwide. Craig is also the co-author of the book, Competing in World-Class Manufacturing, America's 21st Century Challenge. Here to speak on the critical elements of competing globally, please join me in welcoming Craig Giffey.
You took it away. Phil, thank you very much. I'll be stuck on that opening slide for a while if we don't do that. So I'm really excited to be here. As Sarah knows, I had a heck of a time getting here. Storms throughout the Midwest canceled virtually every flight, and I think by some divine intervention from the governor, a flight opened up to Charlotte, and I was able to fly into Charlotte and have a 3.5-hour ride here, arriving at 2 o'clock in the morning. So if I'm a little less than coherent, I apologize, but I'm going to give you a very fast-paced presentation today looking at the issues of competing globally through the lens of global manufacturers. When I saw who was speaking before me, which was a Secretary of Commerce at the state level, I was a little bit nervous. I've done this 2 other times with Secretary of Commerce for the United States. I worked with Gary Locke at the National Summit in Detroit. Gary is a wonderful individual. First Secretary of Commerce in the Obama administration, and unfortunately, or fortunately for Gary, shortly after working with us on around that, he was no longer the Secretary of Commerce. Last spring, I had the opportunity to testify in front of Congress. I'd never done that before. That's a really unique experience. I don't know, has anybody ever seen a congressional testimony live? Have you ever testified in front of Congress? Okay, so, all right, so I thought they were kidding when they said you have 5 minutes, but they're serious when they said you have 5 minutes. You got a little clock in front of you, the clock ticks down, et cetera. But what I didn't realize was I was the second witness. I guess I was a rebuttal witness to Secretary Bryson, who had been called. He also had 5 minutes. And for the next hour and a half, they asked Secretary Bryson questions, virtually torturing the man in this House committee, and I was the next one up. So by the time I was ready to go, I was sweating bullets, and I figured this was going to be, but I think they had pretty much exhausted themselves. But shortly thereafter, about a month later, Secretary Bryson was also out of his job. So I wish for Secretary Decker at the state level. I don't know that I have any impact at the state level. I wish you the very best, and however, if you do end up in national office, please avoid me. Today I'm actually going to be spending, as I said, some time looking at the issues driving manufacturing competitiveness on a global basis. And I'm going to take you through kind of a 4-part agenda, and if I go fast enough, there's actually a secret bonus 5th part on the agenda we may or may not get to. So first I want to talk a little bit about our research background in terms of what gets us here and where's most of this information coming from today. The majority of what I'm going to be drawing on today comes from a 2-year collaboration that we've done with the World Economic Forum on a project called The Future of Manufacturing, and now Manufacturing for Growth. By the way, the World Economic Forum has the greatest thing in the world figured out. We, as consulting firms and professional services firms, we compete mightily with each other to win these projects so we can devote massive amounts of resources and do the entire project pro bono for a relatively ungrateful client. After doing that 2 years in a row, I think I'm actually skipping the 3rd year. The results for Manufacturing for Growth will be officially released to the public on May 2nd. I've got some of the results sprinkled throughout here, but I can't actually tell you what those results are, but you'll see them pop up. And the Future of Manufacturing was released a year ago. We've also had a 5-year collaboration with the Council on Competitiveness, looking at what they believed and what we believed was the next big thing, going back to actually before the economic downturn, which was manufacturing competitiveness. And in that process, 2 of the things that research that we've led was the development of a manufacturing competitiveness index, and we'll talk more about that later. We did this because we felt that the competitiveness indices that we were seeing on a global basis, particularly, by the way, those being produced by the World Economic Forum, weren't consistent with what we saw manufacturers telling us. We saw Switzerland, for example, consistently listed at the top of the list of most competitive nations, and yet very rarely did we see ourselves losing jobs out of the United States to Switzerland. And they had China, ranked 27th or below in terms of competitiveness, and yet we continued to see our jobs moving to Asia and moving offshore. So we developed an index that looked at it specifically through the lens of what makes manufacturers competitive and what manufacturing CEOs, global CEOs, think about national competitiveness as well as their own country competitiveness. So we'll delve into that a little bit more. I've actually been doing this for 30 years. In a couple of months, I'll have been with Deloitte for 30 years, and I joined Deloitte after a short career in industry, and prior to that I was actually working on a PhD in operations research at Ohio State. So despite the fact that I managed to keep my hair color relatively dark, I've been doing this for a very long time, and I've been exploring the notions of manufacturing competitiveness going back to really the inception of the Council on Competitiveness, which was formed in the mid-1980s by President Reagan. It started off as an presidential commission to study industrial productivity, and it ultimately got spun off as a separate 501c3 to continue to look at those issues. So anyway, we're going to mix all of that up today and do as many slides as we can in a short period of time and wake both you and me up for the morning. I'd like to thank for our work with primarily the World Economic Forum. We had a number of companies. Some of those companies are located, if not in North Carolina, in South Carolina, somewhere in the Carolinas. And we had a number of organizations, academic, subject matter experts that participated, including those from both North and South Carolina, such as Duke and the Institute for International Competitiveness here. So we've had lots of input. We've had workshops around the world for multiple years in Japan, in Brazil, in India, in Germany, in Russia, in London, and of course in Davos, Switzerland for the last couple of years, which is also a very unique experience if you ever get a chance to go there. Again, a lot of what I'm going to be drawing on is going to come from the future of manufacturing work. And the future of manufacturing work really it meant to boil the ocean. And by the way, most of the reports that I'm speaking about today are on those memory sticks, thumb drives that are on your tables. And I think there's a lot of other stuff. I think we unloaded our entire library of work with the Council on Competitiveness, with the World Economic Forum, and anything else we got. So if you want that, or if you're just looking for something to swing around your finger, I used to do that when I was a lifeguard. It was a lot of fun. It kept it was a calming influence. Anyway, take those with you, and you can have PDFs of the reports. But the future of manufacturing was really a boil the ocean look at all the issues and trends that were shaping manufacturing. And it looked at the world of manufacturing competitiveness today, as well as the key trends shaping competition going forward. So as part of that effort, we wanted to look at where are we today and how did we get here? Right? So it's not a silly question. It's like we're in a world that's highly competitive, but when some of the things that Secretary Decker was talking about back in the 60s, this wasn't the world that I grew up being exposed to. This wasn't the original way that manufacturing or even competitiveness laid out. So something changed over the last several decades or longer, and we wanted to explore how we got to where we're at, understand what our starting point is before we move forward. Clearly, when we look at any type of economic data, we see that manufacturing GDP has grown dramatically for emerging market economy nations over the most recent past, driving higher total GDP. So seems to be a direct correlation, and you can pick virtually any time period, between manufacturing GDP, which is on the vertical axis, and overall GDP or real GDP and the compounded annual growth rate of that. And you can see that for the developing economies, the emerging market economies, that correlation is very strong, and as manufacturing grows, as they grow their manufacturing base, the overall economy grows, they prosper. You can also see, by the way, for the developed nations, when you have lower manufacturing growth, lower success in manufacturing, overall GDP does not grow quite as rapidly. And we've got literally hundreds of such data slides. I thought this one would be a good starting point. But when we step back and really to tell you a story, to simplify a relatively complex story for this presentation this morning, we wanted to understand what the primary drivers of manufacturing's rapid globalization have been. And when we looked at the data, we would say that predominantly the globalization, the rapid globalization that we now are experienced, right, that we now live in, occurred over the last 20 years. And there were multiple drivers of that rapid globalization, but we would like to point out several of them that help simplify the story and make it fairly clear. One, there was a rapid explosion or proliferation of free trade agreements. And simultaneous with that, there was an explosion in the use of what we call digital technology infrastructures. That's a nice way of describing, or a more elaborate way of describing, computer-aided technologies, computer-aided manufacturing technologies, including research, design, and actual manufacturing processes. That allowed for the disaggregation of global supply chains in a way that manufacturers had never really been able to do before. And it also created not only a working class, but a new middle class in other parts of the world, primarily in Asia. When we look at some of the data behind this, this is the number of free trade agreements that existed between 6 key countries: the US, Brazil, Germany, China, India, and Japan. And by the way, for most of our studies, we zero in on these 6 countries because they represent 3, I'll say, 20th century developed powerhouses in manufacturing and economic, from an economic standpoint, and that deals with, I'm not sure I can do this with the head pounding, but with both Germany, the United States, and Japan being the leaders of the 20th century. And then we've got 3 emerging market nations: China, India, and Brazil. So throughout this, you'll see some of that. But if we looked at the free trade agreements that were in place in 1980, this is what it looked like between these 3 countries. But as we know, the World Trade Organization really struggled to get from where they were to a new, more comprehensive, updated, modern trade agreement. And the Doha rounds continued to stall, and I think we could largely say have failed, or we could be nice and just say they're stalled indefinitely. But while that was going on, countries, actually under pressure from companies, started to implement more free trade agreements, so that by 2000 we had this look of free trade agreements, and by 2011 the free trade agreement spaghetti chart looked like this. And if we added all the other nations in the world, what we found is kind of the genie got out of the bottle, and countries took it into their own hands to create bilateral trade agreements, and that opened up the ability to do commerce on a global basis, to move goods and services, ideas, capital in particular, to other parts of the world. And manufacturers were the first to take advantage of that. And part of the way they took advantage of that was because at the same time, it's hard to imagine, but going back, I remember when I started my career 30 years ago at this firm, and over 35 years ago in general, we didn't really have computer technology, right? I remember the very first physics class I took, I was using a slide rule. I didn't do as well as the kids that had just gotten new calculators, but the notion of having computer technology to help you do calculations was stunning. But during the 1990s and the 2000s, the digitization, the rapid explosion of digital modeling industry was tremendous. So this is looking at different software vendors and their growth over this period of time. But not only was it significant growth, this actually looks at it on a regional basis. And we see that between 2004 and 2010, there was not only the explosion growing, but there was a decided shift in the customers for this digital technology, and it was moving to Asia. Well, what manufacturers were able to do with all of this digitization, right, was they were able to develop and manufacture a product that would be operating in a plant that looked exactly the same anywhere in the world, with the workforce only looking different from the fact that the genetics of that workforce might have been different. So if you're in China, you might notice that it was a Chinese workforce, but other than that, they could make that facility and the digital technology, the computer technology that was driving that plant from design right down to the shop floor controls operate exactly the same as if it was in our backyard here in North Carolina. And they began to move to low-cost labor initially, and then ultimately, as the customers became more sophisticated, they used that digitization to begin to make more advanced products with more advanced process capabilities. It resulted in things like this. This is the Dreamliner, which has fallen on somewhat difficult times. But by the way, it's a good example. It's a great example of globalization. If we had looked at how Boeing produced this plane 25 years ago, or a similar plane 25 years ago, you would never see the number of countries and the number of locations involved in the manufacture of such a sophisticated product. But Boeing has done that partially for balance of trade reasons, make sure that country actually wants to buy these planes. But let's say they do it they really are doing it for having the best technology and the best resources available to them anywhere in the global supply chain network. And despite the little battery problems that they've had, this is an amazing accomplishment of both technology and the application of a sophisticated, robust, advanced manufacturing technology supply chain. And that is the characteristic of what the future looks like. What also came along with all that globalization was a dramatic shift in what's happening is a shift in the consumption of goods and services around the world. So we see if you kind of look at where we're at today, which is say 2012, and you look out to the 2025, 2026, you look out another 10, 15 years, you see that there's a huge shift of middle-class consumption moving to Asia, and that expected to have global middle-class demand grow from US $21 trillion to $56 trillion by 2030, with 80% of that growth coming from Asia. Now, I realize that the numbers in Asia and China in particular are a little bit more subdued than they have been over the last several years, but no matter, even if you tweak those numbers up or down, let's say down a little bit, the shift is dramatic and consistent. And part of what's precipitated that shift was actually the fact that we moved jobs through these global supply chains to other parts of the world. Most estimates would suggest that by 2030, that China is going to be the largest new demand center, as well as having the largest population on the planet. And these shifts in demand, these shifts in middle-class consumers requiring high-value jobs to drive a higher standard of living is having a profound effect on both supply chains as well as the competitive forces at work, meaning that in order to fuel this dramatic growth, to create that new middle class in other parts of the world, in order to develop advanced manufacturing, advanced manufactured products and engage in advanced research, you have to have superior resources, and you're going to pay these people commensurate with what you're paying people in other parts of the world, which means that executives are going to seek out the best talent anywhere in the world, and there's a global war really going on for jobs to drive this kind of growth. And you're right in the middle of it here in North Carolina. This is what it looks like on the ground. I can give you statistics and I can throw numbers at you all day long, and I'll probably continue to do that. But if you want to actually see what it looks like, how many of you have been to Shanghai? Okay, number of you. All right, this is what Shanghai looked like in 1990. And in February, a couple of months ago, I actually had the opportunity to do a speech similar to this to a group of Chinese executives and Western executives from both Europe and primarily North America on pretty much the same topic, a version of it that was obviously tailored to the challenges for emerging market nations. And I was standing in fundamentally this same spot, a building that's actually, I'm not sure it's actually there, down in the, do I have a pointer here? I'm not sure I got a pointer. Yeah. Well, now I have nothing. So just down here at the base of this building, there's a building that goes up there. It actually might be this thing right here, looking out in that direction. And if you're standing there, I had a private dining hall or at a restaurant, it looked wonderful, and this is what it looks like today. And so when we can talk about the numbers, and I can tell you how fast it's growing, but unless you go there and experience, and this is just one of a number of cities, right? Pick your favorite location that all look the same. And this has all been in the last 20 years. So when I try to describe to you the rapid globalization, this is almost all manufacturing and construction fueled, maybe dramatic overcapacity, as we're finding. But we've still seen what happens when we use manufacturing as a core and then manufacturing and innovation as the catalyst for driving economic growth. It's It is truly substantial, and it is jaw-dropping if you've never been there. So if you get a chance, go there. And if I had a chance, I'd show you my actual pictures from my camera standing in the same location. So as part of the study, we actually had to step back and say, does manufacturing still matter? I can't tell you. I've been doing this, like I said, for over 30 years, and I can't tell you the number of times manufacturing has been pronounced dead and not relevant to society and to our economy. In fact, when we started the initiative with the Council on Competitiveness going back in 2008, I think manufacturing was pretty much in that category. We had lost really millions of manufacturing jobs over a long period of time. Economists around the world fundamentally said, you simply needed to move to a service economy. In fact, we could just be researchers in this country. We didn't actually have to make anything, and that life was good. In fact, innovation needed to come from other sectors, other locations, and then somebody got really creative in the financial service sectors, created things that we didn't understand, sold them to us, and then ultimately we found out they weren't so creative or innovative, and we had the great meltdown of 2008, 2009. And all of a sudden, the attention started becoming on manufacturing again. So much so that you saw in the President's State of the Union speech last year and then this year, a significant focus on manufacturing. Well, that's because manufacturing does matter. And we went out to answer the question for ourselves, even though that wasn't part of the project charter, that would say, if this doesn't matter, we're doing a project that's both painful for a painful client, and we're not getting paid, and maybe we should just resign the project. So let's see if this matters, and at least we'll feel better about the work we're doing. We found some research that had been being done at Harvard and the MIT Media Lab, and Professors Ricardo Hausman and Cesar Hidalgo had export trade data for every country in the world for the past 60 years. And they developed a model to try to explain economic growth and economic prosperity. And what you see on the right-hand side, those colorful things, are things that they call tree maps. Tree maps show the composition of a country's economy based on the exports that it is sending out into global markets. And the tan or the lighter colors represent agricultural products. The blue, light blue, dark blue represent electronics, machinery, advanced machinery. Purples tend to be chemicals and other things along the pharmaceutical chemical lines. This happens to be the tree map for Thailand, and it's the difference between 1968 and 2008. And if you looked at almost every country in the world, you would see this type of dramatic change in their base of exports, which is all driven by manufactured products. In fact, the only data they have in the database is manufactured products, and their conclusions are that the advancement of manufacturing capabilities is the most important link to increasing the economic prosperity of the nation, and that many emerging market economies are primed for rapid growth. As a result, the competition for high-value jobs will intensify significantly as nation after nation understand this formula. And the result will be the proverbial bar will continue to be set higher and higher. So when they tried to explain what causes a nation to grow, they actually calculate something called an economic complexity index. For manufacturers, complexity is a thing that it's like, we don't want to see any complexity whatsoever. But in economic terms, economic complexity is a good thing in their terminology because it creates a robust and vibrant economy with rich connection points and networks, and they can measure that economic complexity index on the back of advancing manufacturing capabilities and products and products and processes that are used. And what they found is there is no better single indicator of economic growth or a predictor of how a country is going to do than the manufacturing capabilities, and more importantly, the advanced manufacturing capabilities and innovation capabilities of a country. By the way, if you look at that 60 years worth of data, there were only 2 countries in that data set that show a decline in economic complexity index over that period of time. One is the United States, and the other was the United Kingdom, both having somewhat hollowed out their manufacturing processes and their innovation cycles, but every other country in the world kind of got the story. And whether we're looking at Thailand, Brazil, China, we can plot maps and show how they're growing their manufacturing base, and simultaneously they're growing the economic prosperity of the nation, whether you measure it through this sophisticated economic complexity index or you measure it through more normal means like GDP per capita. So manufacturing, advanced manufacturing innovation is the driver of growth. We can look at it another way, and we can say that if all that data was based on manufacturing exports, and I realize this is quite an eye chart, we looked at this is actually the top 10 most competitive manufacturing nations coming out of the 2013 index, which I'll share with you shortly. And if we look at, and this data is showing manufacturing exports by size, skill, and technology. And some of the ones to zero in on, up in the upper right-hand corner, you can see the movement of China from 2000 to 2011. It's grown tremendously, so that its exports are over $1.7 trillion. It came from a very small base. And if you look at virtually every other country, with a couple of exceptions, their manufacturing exports have grown significantly. The vertical axis actually deals with the, what percentage of total product exports or products and goods exports is manufacturing. So you see that for most countries, developed nations, the percentage that's manufacturing has gone down slightly. For China, it's actually gone up. The exceptions on this that would cause us to worry would be the United States. It's one of those bubbles, if you find it in the middle, that's actually not grown a whole lot, and it's gone backwards. So it's growing more slowly. It's kind of ceded its dominant position, and it's receded. While it's grown like Japan and Germany, it hasn't grown as fast, and certainly hasn't grown as fast as China. But perhaps more troubling, and I realize this is pretty hard to see, so it's in the reports on the thumb drive. If you look at the color coding, you see that shows the breakdown between high technology, medium technology, and low technology exports. So not only is China growing its exports in total, but it's also growing the percentage of its exports that are considered to be high technology exports, advanced manufactured products. At the same time, the U.S. while it's growing its exports, it's actually shrinking the amount of advanced manufactured products that it's exporting. Sometimes those are, DARPA requirements, other requirements, but however you want to look at it, it says that we've actually done something uniquely different than everyone else in the world, with the exception, unfortunately, of Canada, over that same time period, and it's probably not moving in the right direction. Ergo, the emphasis by the current administration on advancing manufacturing capabilities and investing in this as a source of growth, which is exactly the right thing to do. So if we look more closely at what the trends are and what's shaping competitiveness today, we see that the things that got us to this dance, all of that rapid globalization and disaggregation of supply chains, is actually shifting a little bit. That those policymakers, helpful as they like to be, are actually intervening in free market economics. And one of the things that comes out of that, sometimes intentionally, sometimes not intentionally, is ultimately rising protectionist politics. They enact policies through law, through trade barriers and other things that make it more difficult to be able to do business in that country in a way to enable or advantage their country versus the exports that are coming in. We also see an enormous shift in currency, a lot of currency volatility, a lot of currency issues. Currency over this period of time was something that was a given when manufacturers started disaggregating their supply chains, but it proved not to be a given. It proved to be a huge variable in swinging from profitability to non-profitability as they looked at the results of their global supply chains. And exposure to currency volatility, or in some cases exposure to just disadvantageous currency, is causing companies to look differently at their global supply chains. Japan is probably the most recent great example that's showing up in the paper almost regularly, where after 20 years of deflation, they finally said, we really have to do something about this currency thing. Much to the chagrin of their global trading partners, they said, sorry, we've been beat up for too long. We're actually losing our manufacturing base. Even companies like Toyota were trying to figure out how to get out of Japan because they simply couldn't be competitive. And through their now aggressive efforts at monetary easing, you see a shift in the value of the yen. You also see a shift in the Japanese stock market. You see a gold rush as people are rushing to sell, gold and things out of their households because it's totally changed the dynamic. And that shows you how powerful currency can be, but that's one of the things that's actually changing the way companies think about global supply chains. And then finally, the notion that there's low-cost labor out there in the world that's actually going to do you much advantage is fading away. So there's the use of labor rate arbitrage has become something that's rarely sorted to by manufacturing organizations. In some industries that are heavily labor intensive and haven't adopted much technology, they may still be chasing low-cost labor around the world, but for the most part that's gone. And as a result, supply chains are increasingly being reconfigured toward countries and regions with the right combination of favorable competitiveness attributes, which is important whether you're the United States or you're the state of North Carolina, because a lot of that competitiveness plays out at the state level. So in the 2013 index, this was the second time we did it. We did it in 2010, we did it in 2013. In 2013, we had over 550 CEOs that responded to this survey tool around the world. In 2010, we had just over 500, so we've now had 1,000 CEOs actually participate in this. It's not quite clear to me why they participate, because this is a fairly long and grueling survey. And one of the things that it delves into is we ask them to force rank countries around the world in terms of competitiveness. Tell us which countries are most to least competitive. And we ask them not only to tell us how competitive is the nation today, but we ask them to tell us how competitive is that nation likely to be 5 years from now. It's their best guess. But we think a CEO's best guess that's operating in the industry and making decisions about where to put plant and equipment and where to hire people, that guess is pretty important. Even if they're wrong, by the way, if you've ever dealt with CEOs, and I think we have some in the room, you'll find they still think they're right. So the important thing is that that's where they're going to put their money, whether they're right or they're wrong. So in some cases, what they believe is what's actually going to happen, regardless of what the underlying data may or may not say. By the way, their underlying data does support their positions. So if we get a little closer to this so that you can see it, less of an eye test, and we zero in on the top 15, we get something like this. And if you look more closely at the more pertinent data, you see that CEOs around the world would say that the United States is the third most competitive manufacturing location in the world, behind China and Germany. And in 5 years, these same 550 plus CEOs would say they see U.S. competitiveness declining, and by the way, for both Germany and the United States declining, and countries like India and Brazil moving up to the top of the list. Now, by the way, they told us the same thing in 2010, and both India and Brazil have had some problems getting from where they're at to where they want to go. In fact, India continues to be the country that's always on the verge, right? It's the next big thing that's going to happen that just doesn't seem to happen. But sooner or later, the assumption is they will figure it out. They've got the young, talented workforce and trained workforce. They have a massive labor shortage of skilled workers to drive what they want to try to get done, particularly around advanced manufacturing. So the U.S. and to some extent Germany have gotten a reprieve during this time period. Germany's stock went up between 2010 and 2013, largely because it became obvious that it was surrounded by so many other poor performers in Europe. It became a star. It probably was a star, but if we went back 10 years ago, Germany was not a star. It was really struggling, and it did it on the basis of its advanced manufacturing exports and its capabilities around that. So if you're a developed market economy, you look at that and you say, I'm a little bit concerned about that, because the majority of the most competitive nations, according to the people that are going to be making the investment decisions, they believe those nations are in Europe. Or excuse me, it's not wrong. They believe those nations are in Asia. And you see a significant movement of competitiveness to the marketplace where you see that growing middle class. In fact, if you're in Europe, you should be particularly concerned because only Germany remains in the top 15 in 5 years. So we expect Europe to continue to be a disaster for a number of years, and we think even when and if it finally gets a grip on its economic problems, if it doesn't drag the rest of us down again, that it'll be struggling to keep up with the rest of the world. If you look at it on a regional basis, you see North America is actually relatively well positioned, with the U.S., Canada, and Mexico all in the top 15 5 years from now. But still, that powerhouse in Asia is something to contend with, and those are all emerging market nations. The other thing we ask in this survey and this study is what drives manufacturing competitiveness? What's most important to you when you look at a country from a competitiveness standpoint? And we have 10 major categories of competitiveness that they've helped us identify, and inside of there we've got another 40 to 60 individual variables. So among these 10 things like cost and energy and supplier networks and et cetera, we're able to determine from their responses what's the most important driver. And the number one most important driver, they tell us, of a nation's competitiveness is something they call, or we call, talent-driven innovation. And when we break it down to the individual variables, they say what matters most to us as a company investing in a location and looking at a country's competitiveness is the quality and availability of the researchers, scientists, and engineers, number one. The most important variable out of all 60-some variables in the entire study. And second is the overall quality and availability of skilled labor. There are some other variables that make up talent-driven innovation that we see there, like the quality of primary and secondary schools, produce sufficient supply of STEM-educated resources, and the quality of colleges and universities. But ultimately, you see in their mind, it's all about getting the labor force, both at the scientific labor force, the engineering labor force, the skilled labor force necessary. And if you've got it, they'll come, and if you don't, they're going to go somewhere else, because they've proven to you over the last 20 years that they can put that facility up anywhere in the world. Any place they want, and they can make it look and operate exactly the same. What they need are both the talent to drive it and really the economic, often tax factors that make it conducive for them to be able to make some profit. When we look more broadly at those things, we see this is actually in order. Talent-driven innovation is the most important driver. After that is economic, trade, and tax systems, which means that policymakers, the intervention from policymakers is becoming more important. Then it becomes cost of labor and materials, supplier networks, legal and regulatory system, et cetera. This heat map of sorts is looking at how those same 6 countries, we had 40, 50 countries in the study, but we asked them to actually rank these 6 countries against all of the variables, which was, this was when I was watching this, you can actually see them responding to this thing online. You can track them. When they got to this question, they had to actually fill out this matrix against all these variables, against all these countries. This is exactly the place they stopped responding. So this was normally the place we had to go back and encourage them and bribe them to continue and finish the survey. But what you see is that they have a very detailed and sophisticated understanding of competitiveness. They tell us that talent-driven innovation is the most important driver. They also tell us that China is the most competitive nation, but they aren't telling us that China is the most capable at talent-driven innovation. The variables, all 10 of these, work together to create a competitive landscape, a competitive fabric. And that China still excels in cost areas, but it is rapidly pulling away from counterparts like Brazil and India. If you look at the coloring, where green is good, darker green is good, blue is at the other end of the spectrum, right? What you see is that China excels in cost, but it's also becoming much better in areas like talent-driven innovation and some of the policy measures that are necessary to drive competitiveness. It's making the transformation as we speak to look more like the Japans, the US, and the Germanys. For Japan, US, and Germany, it's all about talent-driven innovation, to some extent economic, trade, and tax systems. It's about physical infrastructure, but it's certainly not about labor costs. So in order to be competitive and to compete on a global basis, there are different things that can get you in the game, but what can keep you in the game over the long term is clearly talent-driven innovation. When we look at some actual data on some of these variables, we see that when we said that labor rate arbitrage was fading, we see that the gap between developed economy nations and emerging economy nations is shrinking. It's still sizable, but compared to 2000, when the ratio of average wages in developed nations to those in developing nations was 2.5%, you see a much different gap being closed. And when labor becomes a smaller and smaller part of your overall cost or factors of production, as that gap closes, then it's not a labor cost issue anymore. It is indeed these other issues around the ability of the talent in the organization, the skilled workforce, to help an organization drive its innovation agenda. But if we continue to try to measure success on that regard, you see the U.S., this is the PISA scores, the 2009 last data that we had. You see the U.S. is actually, unfortunately, it's off the chart. When I got down to the top 20, the U.S. wasn't in there except in reading. It was off the charts in terms of math and science. It ranked 31st in math, 23rd in science, and it did make the top 20, 17th in reading. So if talent-driven innovation and a skilled workforce is necessary, and this is one metric looking at how we're doing, it doesn't say we're doing so well as a developed nation. By the way, it's not a lot better for Germany, who was the other country that was up there in that top 5 with us. They're doing better than we are, but still not stellar. And China, well, yes, China is, in fact, not only got the cost advantage, but they're producing STEM-educated resources at a very rapid rate. Now, whether they can convert that to the talent that's necessary to drive true innovation and success remains to be seen, but I certainly wouldn't count against them, right? I mean, if you have enough at-bats with the right kind of resources over a long enough period of time, you're going to figure this thing out. And they're certainly building the bench strength to be able to do that. But more importantly, this is, I realize, another eye chart. I apologize. They're in the reports. You can take a look at it. I'm going to zero in on a couple of other things, which really is what matters. I've looked at a number of input and output variables across these countries. I want to zero in on 3 things. One is labor costs, one is labor productivity, and the other is innovation, or an innovation index. Very hard to measure innovation, so we let INSEAD look at measuring innovation and giving countries different scores. What we see is that the U.S., even with its relatively high-cost labor compared to China, by the way, the break between the dark blue and the light blue is the midpoint in these floating bars. So if you're in the light blue on the bottom half, you're below the average. If you're in the dark blue on the top, you're above the average. Obviously, if you're at the top of the bar, you're best in category for that particular thing. So you can see that the formula for the United States that keeps us in the game is productivity of the workforce and innovation. It ranks very high in the innovation index score, and it ranks at the top of the list in productivity. Unfortunately for manufacturing or for policymakers, the dirty little secret about productivity is that to be more productive, it doesn't mean, and by the way, I go all over the world and people actually get confused by this, it doesn't mean that your workers are working faster than their workers, right? And they're somehow, you get up and they work longer and their hands and arms and legs are moving quicker. That's not what productivity is. What we have are less people creating the same output, and that's done because we've enabled them with technology. We've substituted capital for labor. So to get those type of productivity, it means we have to, we've attracted the right capital, we've invested in the right manufacturing processes. It doesn't necessarily grow lots of shop floor jobs, but it does grow a different kind of shop floor job, right? It grows a much more sophisticated worker working multiple computer-controlled machines in a flexible manufacturing setting. But the ecosystem around that employee, the research and development and all the other things that feed that supply chain is extraordinary. And that's why the GDP of North Carolina has grown in manufacturing, while the employment in North Carolina in manufacturing has not grown. That story is playing out everywhere, but it's still a good thing, right? If you fail to compete and win on that basis of being able to have the most productive, most talented workforce driving the greatest innovation for products and services and processes, you will in fact lose at this game. And that's what's absolutely critical. So finally, I know I'm just about out of time, right? So finally, I wanted to get to the real conclusions out of the future of manufacturing. And there were a number of things that we concluded that we're going to differentiate high-performing nations and companies as we go forward. First was that the infrastructure necessary to enable manufacturing to flourish and contribute to growth was going to grow in importance. Infrastructure is everything from buildings and highways and internet, but it also includes the infrastructure associated with science and technology, universities, science centers, research centers, etc. And it is in fact going to grow in importance. You can't win this game based on infrastructure alone, but you do have to keep pace, and the U.S. has one of the best infrastructures when you consider its intellectual assets, its universities. It has the most envious universities around the world, and that's why, by the way, everybody sends us their students so we can train them so they can go back and compete against us and take our jobs. And that will continue because of the power of the infrastructure that the U.S. has to produce those intellectual assets. Competition to attract foreign direct investment is going to continue to grow because frankly, everybody's looking better. And not only are they literally looking better, they're trying to look better. So it's like they all develop makeup and marketing, and they're out there trying to sell companies on how good they look. And it's getting hard for companies to figure out where to really go, because it used to be easy. There was the United States, and then if you wanted to go somewhere else, it was probably China. But now it's much more complicated, and the marketing and the sophistication of countries around the world to attract that FDI has grown. And so as a result of that, you, and by the way, most FDI attraction happens at the state level, you have to work that much harder to be able to sell your wares to companies around the world to locate here or around the country. Materials resources is going to grow in important because of material shortages. And the interesting thing about it is, no matter how many times we hear about material shortages and the coming crisis of the lack of particular materials, the truth is what always happens is there's innovation. So the more material shortages we have, the more material science breakthroughs that we get, and we really see that we're on the edge of a real kind of explosion in material science innovation as a result of some of the pressure that we see on materials. And to the extent that you're investing in material science, that's probably a good area to go to. Affordable clean energy strategies and effective energy policies are going to shape the winners and the losers. We see that debate playing out on a global basis right now. Unclear, what your personal positions are on shale gas and other things, but it's clear the United States is in a uniquely favorable position with the resources that it has at its disposal, and if it can prudently and responsibly develop those resources as an interim step to even cleaner energy, it puts itself in a dramatically improved position, because the cost of energy is critical to manufacturers, as well as the availability of that raw material to feed advanced chemicals industries and other things. So we're at the edge of what could be an exciting revolution for the country from a competitiveness standpoint if we go about it responsibly. But ultimately, the things at the top of the list that most are going to differentiate the highest performing countries and companies are three things: innovation. Those countries that are more innovative can establish the environments to be more innovative, and those companies that are more innovative, and we've got tons of research showing up in those reports that show how more innovative companies outperform their peers in virtually every measure you could come up with. Innovation actually matters, and it shows up in the marketplace, it shows in their market capitalization, it shows up in their growth rates, and for countries the same thing happens. Unfortunately, innovation and money aren't the same thing. Spending more money alone doesn't necessarily make you more innovative, but money's an important part of it. You can't do it without it, but you can, just throwing money at it alone won't fix the problem. Because part of the problem is also human capital, and companies are struggling to fill advanced manufacturing jobs with the right talent and access the best human capital, and it's going to become increasingly important. In fact, it'll be the most important variable going forward. Your ability to produce the right talent, the STEM-educated talent, to help these companies innovate, to achieve their innovation agenda goals, is what will differentiate you from everybody else in the world. And then finally, a nod to the policymakers, the strategic use of public policy as an enabler of economic development will place a premium on collaboration between policymakers and business leaders. So developed nations will increasingly be challenged by emerging economy nations over the next 25 years along all of these dimensions, and winning nations and companies will outperform their rivals in the battles for affordable, sustainable, cleaner energy sources, for innovation and talent, and in applying public policy to strategically shape competitive capabilities. And with that, we do not have time for the bonus section, but I don't know if I have time for any questions, but thank you very much. I really appreciated being here.
And Craig, if you will maybe take some questions during the break, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much, and great remarks. What a wealth of information. I'm so glad that we do have these USB jump drives to take back with us and explore that data a little bit more. You also really keyed up the remarks for our next presentation very well, where we're going to hear more about the North Carolina specific data in terms of learning and economic development here in North Carolina. At this time, I'd like to invite Jacqueline Oates. She's the graduate student manager with the Joint School of Nanoscience and Nanoengineering at NC State University in UNC Greensboro, and she will be introducing our next two speakers. Thank you.
So 15 years ago, when my children were toddlers and we were making plans for backyard tea parties and organizing their teddy bears as guests, I couldn't know that less than 20 miles away, people I had never met, who would never know me or my children, were gathering in boardrooms and creating visions and then plans and then enacting those plans that would impact us so greatly. I'm reminded of this every morning when I park my car and take a moment to look at our new building, the Joint School of Nanoscience and Nanoengineering at the Gateway University Research Park. Men and women, strangers to me, worked with forethought and organization, smart effort, and effective strategies, practicalities, common sense, and accountability. It was a true collaborative effort with support coming from the universities, policymakers, industry, researchers, faculty. So while I walk to my office, I feel deep appreciation. My livelihood, being a part of this grand effort to bring a sustainable economy based on high-tech research and industry, is truly a privilege. And it's working. The founding dean, Jim Ryan, told me the other day that in the last 3 years, our school has directly created more than 130 full-time jobs at every level, and we are advertising 3 more right now. But best of all, my youngest son is officially an Aggie. This summer, he will be working on programming for an interdisciplinary marine robotics project. This is a program that didn't exist 5 years ago. I could not have ever imagined when I looked at that little boy with his stuffed animals and mint tea that such an amazing opportunity would be available to him. In these few years since coming on board with the Joint School, one of the best aspects of this effort is the smart and supportive people I've met, especially those now that I think of as connectors. Dr. John Harden is one. Now I have to tell you, I'm rarely the smartest person in the room, so when I go to the conference and events where I run into him, I spend a lot of time listening and observing. And one of the things that I've observed about Dr. Harden is he has this knack of getting the right people with the right knowledge in the right place to share and advise each other and then make decisions based on solid information. His strategic planning as executive director of the North Carolina Board of Science and Technology in the North Carolina Department of Commerce is research-based and provides solid and justifiable recommendations for the governor, General Assembly, and Secretary of Commerce in the science and technology arenas. He will be sharing information with you today on a study he conducted giving us a baseline of where North Carolina stands in science and technology-based industries. You will also hear about the current state of STEM education, and I don't think there's a better leader in academic forethought and strategic planning than Dr. Sam Houston. Dr. Houston, who's currently the president and CEO of the North Carolina Science, Mathematics, and Technology Center, has been integral to improving STEM education in North Carolina and the nation. His planning strategies are based in clear practicality and are application-driven. I think his area of expertise that most interests me is programming for the 21st century skill sets for a more sophisticated workforce. That, and again, he is a wonderful connector who understands that the essential nature of partnerships. My daughter looked at his full biography last night. Now she goes to the same school where he graduated, UNCG, where she's studying science, and she said, "Mom, he's a rock star." He, of course, will be sharing with you a current baseline on educational efforts in STEM education. Dr. Harden and Dr. Houston will provide foundation and focus for the very important work that we will be doing this afternoon, and I offer the floor to them with deep appreciation.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I just said to her she's too nice, and I do want to meet your daughter. We have about a 35-minute session, and I have an hour of things I would like to say to you. And if I had that hour, I'd have my team up here with me. John's got 2 hours, so we made an agreement that we would move quickly and give him as much time as possible. Part of that is because you have at your spot a document. This document is, we believe, one of the first statewide efforts to look at STEM and look at the STEM activity here in North Carolina as it relates to exactly the presentation that you just heard. And that is, how do we develop the talent and skills and abilities to support the 21st century economy and make sure that all of our young people and others can find a place in that economy. So you've got the 2013 scorecard overview. And as some of you know, I could not deny myself the opportunity to put strategies that engage minds on the cover, because we believe that this STEM discussion is much greater than just a series of isolated experiences in a discipline. So I challenged Charles Coble, Dr. Charles Coble, raise your hand please, and Dr. Ken Jenkins, to take a look at STEM in North Carolina through that lens. And through that lens, thinking about economy first and education second. Not leading with education, but leading with a question about what do we need to do in North Carolina to advance the economy. And as you quickly start to see, that blends and bleeds right into the discussion about what we need to do in our schools. And Greg Giffey, I am so excited about the fact that high on the list of those findings that you have, the research spoke to elementary and secondary education before it spoke to the university importance. Now don't misunderstand me, I'm not laying a value on either of those, except that I think we've forgotten the fact that we need to engage young people early in this discussion to get them excited. So the lens through which these guys looked at what's happening in North Carolina was around themes of engagement and development and persistence. You can read what that has to say about the document. But it says get kids excited and really build on their curiosity, do the things that are necessary along the way to advance that, and don't give up. Keep pushing. The report looks at 6 domains. You can see them. I won't read them to you. I contend probably the most important of those domains is addressed by teacher quality. We know that one of the most important things that can advance what happens in the classroom is the capacity of the teacher. And when you look at science and mathematics in North Carolina and across this country, we aren't doing enough to make sure that our teachers are highly capable in those 2 arenas. And we call for some action items. Each domain asked itself a question, or more than one question, and in each case, some priority action items were found. The data is someone else's. I didn't ask that we do original research. The data that's found here is acknowledged in the back of the document and in the 100+ page full document that you will all want to read. More information is given about citation and resources. You can get this full document by going to, in a PDF form if you wish, it's online now at ncsmt.org. And that's our website. When you get to that website, you'll see an area, an arena that says programs. If you pull the program tab, this report you will find there. You can also go to the back of the document and use the quick response, and I've heard that called a lot of different things. Seal, tag, stamp. Right here will lead you to the document. We plan to take this document on the road. We're going to try to work our way into each of the economic development zones and make a full presentation. We will be here, so ask us questions during the rest of the day. And I see a good friend of mine back there in the back, and I want to say something to preempt what I know he's going to say. When you think about STEM, you can't think just science, technology, engineering, and math, please. Think about it in that more in-depth definition of the acronym of strategies that engage minds, because being creative, learning through the arts, developing an appreciation through a study of the humanities, understanding the rest of that world that we just saw that's trying to take our world away from us, is important to this discussion. So don't just think STEM, think strategies that engage minds. And I have bumper stickers if you would like one. I'm going to conclude with that. Please look this over and question us. John?
Right. Do we have a remote control for this? Or okay, good. Thank you. Well, I want to congratulate Sam on his work and his team. They put an enormous amount of work into that document and that scorecard, and so please do read it. It's an excellent piece of work. Craig Giffey is a hard act to follow because he has some great data. I have some good data too, but I don't have the budget that Craig has, and so my pictures may not look quite as good as his do. But I'm going to zoom in on the North Carolina level. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of science, technology, and innovation. You all have gotten this already. But what it really boils down to is a lot of the debate that you hear going on among politicians is about essentially what I would call tweaking the economy, fiscal policy or monetary policy or stimulus. And those things obviously matter, but they matter only to the extent that they're accompanied by countless large and small discoveries that are required to create more value from a fixed set of natural resources. There is not much more stuff on this earth now than there was millions of years ago, except for the occasional asteroid that hits. And so, the value that we have now is value that we have created, our human minds have created by recombining things and packaging things in innovative ways that didn't exist before. And that's really what innovation is. It's the creation and adoption of new products, services, and business models, all three of those things to yield more value. And so that's what our innovation index looks at, is to what extent is this process occurring in North Carolina, and where are we strong and where are we weak? And all of this innovation takes place in an ecosystem. We tend to focus on certain aspects of that ecosystem, but you really need to look at the entire ecosystem, because the health of the entire ecosystem is dependent upon those components, and they're all interactive. If one component is weak, the rest of the ecosystem is weak. And so at the core of the process, and we've depicted it here as a linear process, and clearly it is not a linear process, but if I depicted it how it would be in reality, it would be too confusing to follow, I think. And so we've simplified it here, but we're really trying to take innovative ideas and discoveries and help create innovative products and practices, which leads to innovative organizations, which the ultimate goal is economic development and economic well-being and a high quality of life for citizens here in North Carolina and worldwide. That looks pretty simple when you map it out in a linear process like that, but there are lots of gaps in that process, and it doesn't always occur naturally, or at least to the extent it does occur naturally, it's often at a suboptimal level. And so there are lots of things that we can do from a private sector perspective and a public sector perspective and a public-private partnership that we can help lubricate this process, help it move along a little bit faster. So one gap is in the translation of innovative ideas to innovative products and practices. And there are lots of factors that go into that, anything from funding to policies to facilities and equipment. And so my office and my board, chaired by Bland Godfrey, we try to focus on these things and try to make sure that we're stronger in this area. Another gap is taking these innovative products and practices and translating them into those innovative organizations. That's really the commercialization phase, the tech transfer phase. And there's a lot of slippage there, and so we try to focus on those issues as well. It's also not always naturally occurring that innovative organizations will just naturally lead to economic well-being and quality of life. You need to have a well-trained workforce. We've heard that repeatedly so far today. And so there are policies and programs that can be put in place to educate the workforce and make sure that they have the high skills and high training that they need. And overarching all of that is a supportive environment that involves both public understanding as well as public leadership. And so what we do in this innovation index is essentially we take a comprehensive measurement of the ecosystem's health. So it's like getting an annual physical. And it probably should be annual, but I would guess that most of you all don't get an annual physical. You probably get a every 5-year physical, or if you do, even that. I think I'm on the 10-year plan. But we've done it at the Board of Science and Technology about every 5 years. We'd like to do it more often, but we don't have the staff and the resources to do it that often. The data don't change that quickly, though, and so it's not critical to do it every year. So there are several purposes for this. One is to simply identify our strengths and weaknesses. It's also to inform decisions in policy making, also to establish benchmarks and measure our effectiveness. And to do this comprehensively, it's important to focus on lots of different components of that ecosystem, not just single components, to the extent possible include multiple indicators of those various components, and to compare on several dimensions. Spatially, meaning at the North Carolina level, within North Carolina compared to leading countries, lots of different spatial dimensions, as well as over time, not just a snapshot in time, but over a several-year period. And so what we do on this is we try to measure all aspects of that ecosystem, and for every one of these boxes, we try to have 5 or so indicators. And so in total, we have, I think, 6 different categories, about an average of 5 indicators per category, so we have a total of about 30 indicators. And within those indicators, there are subcomponents as well. Now, measurement is not an easy thing to do. And there are lots of funny little sayings about measurement, and I'm going to give you one of those, a truism, and that is, not everything that matters can be measured. It's also true that not everything that can be measured matters, and so what we try to do in this index is to focus on where those two overlap. And that's a much smaller subset than either of the two individually. And to find out what we can measure and what can't, and what we actually want to measure, we've gone out and looked at about 30 different other innovation indexes that are out there. Other countries do these, national organizations do these, Deloitte & Touche, and other states do these. And so we've tried to take the best practices from those and apply those to North Carolina. So this is the North Carolina Tracking Innovation Index, and it's not quite done yet, so I'm going to do a pre-release preview for you all, and I'm going to present about 1/3 of the indicators that are in there. I'm going to do this very quickly. So I'm going to cover it very quickly, and so you have all of these. Mine is coffee stained, but you have a copy of this at your table, and we're going to use these when we get into our discussion groups later on. So I'm going to go through it very quickly. So summary observations. Here are the conclusions that I've reached so far, and based on other work we've done like this in the past. Our innovation ecosystem is relatively unhealthy, and it is not really improving either. And I think that's a real opportunity for this group, and that's the one reason we're having this Science Summit today. Our performance across all these different indicators is very mixed. We lead when it comes to academic institutions and basic R&D. We have a lot of opportunity there. But we have a very low level of industry R&D, and the vast majority of R&D that's done in North Carolina and nationwide is done by industry, about 2/3 of it or more. We have a lot of weaknesses in converting our innovation inputs, which are really strong, to innovation outputs and commercialization, which help grow the economy. Our economy is relatively low skill and low tech, and some of these conclusions will be surprising to people, but I think the data back them up. We have a continuous need to educate and train human capital. Our innovation assets and activities are very concentrated geographically. I think we all know this, but when you look at the data, I think it's actually more concentrated than many people realize. And we have a need to understand the state as a whole, because we often talk about North Carolina as the state as a whole, but then we need to zoom in and look at how things vary across the different regions. The good news, though, all those previous points kind of sound like bad news, but the good news is that we have a lot of potential. We have a lot of the key pieces in place, but those pieces are not being maximized. And through a relatively little bit of work, not a little bit, but a relatively little bit of work, I think we can leverage those a lot more and get a lot more output for the input. So we have 6 categories. I'm going to go through 5 of those because we don't have the data for the 6th yet. And the way I've done it is, if you go back to that diagram, we're starting with the end first in the data I'm presenting you. We're starting with economic well-being and quality of life. We're going to look at that, and then we're going to start at the beginning of the process and work our way through. So when you're looking at the data, keep in mind that almost all these data are expressed as percentages or ratios. So, and that's to factor out the size of an economy, for example. If we looked at the raw numbers for different states, California would win on everything. And that's because California's economy is about 1/4 of the size of the US economy. So we put everything on a per capita basis or per GDP basis. Also, don't get hung up on small differences in rankings across states or values across states, because these things bounce back and forth over the years, and little differences don't matter that much. Look most at the broad patterns and trends. Also, when you're interpreting an indicator, don't do it in isolation, do it in the context of other indicators, and some of the times you'll see some surprising findings for some states that pop up there as being leaders. states like South Dakota or Wyoming, you might say, why is that the case? Well, it's because these are on a per capita basis, and those states have a small population, and some of the times that makes their values high. But it's still useful to know how states are doing. So if you look at per capita gross domestic product, and here's where I'm going to start going pretty fast. All of these charts have the same pattern, and that is North Carolina will always be in green. Green means go, it means good, it means money, whatever you want to say. But North Carolina will always be green. The U.S. average will always be blue. And then we've selected 6 comparison states because people always want to know, well, how's North Carolina doing compared to Massachusetts? Or how are we doing compared to California? So California is red. Red is bad. You know, it's not a good color. So California is red. Massachusetts is yellow. And then people want to know, well, how are we doing compared to our southeastern, competitor states? And so we picked Georgia and Virginia. They're strong competitor states in the southeast. They're highlighted. And then we picked 2 other states that are kind of middle of the pack states overall and that are also kind of on the rise, and that's Colorado and Washington State. But if you want it, but all the data are there for all 50 states, so if you want to see those, you can get that, and we're going to have the appendices that have the actual raw data. So what you can see on per capita gross domestic product, North Carolina is below average, and we are below all the other competitor states except Georgia. Now, I'm not going to discuss it much more than that because you'll have plenty of time after this to discuss it. If you look at how these things have changed over time, and for all of these indicators at the state level, we usually start at the year 2000 and work up to the most recent year available. Some of the times that's the current year, some of the times it's 2 or 3 years ago. It's very hard to get consistent data across all states, across all years. So you can see that our per capita gross domestic product is increasing, but it's not increasing as fast as the U.S. average, and it's not increasing as fast as a lot of those comparison states. And so the trend is not, it's good, but it's not nearly as good as it could be or should be. If you look at how we compare to the top 15 countries, and this is where some of that small denominator effect comes in sometimes when you've got a small per capita. I'm not sure that we're competing that much with Luxembourg, but it is useful to see that they have the highest per capita gross domestic product. You don't see countries like China in here or India, and that's because they have very large populations. But if we want to, we can get those data, and that's not hard to chart, and we may do that. But what you can see is the U.S. ranks 15th in the world when it comes to per capita GDP. If North Carolina were a country, it'd be 20th, but it'd actually be a little bit lower than that because there's a lot of states ahead of us. But if you just look at the raw numbers that we have here, it would be 20th. If you look at how these things are changing over time for countries, the pattern that's clear here is that the per capita GDP of a lot of these countries is going up very quickly, much more quickly than North Carolina or the U.S. And they were high to begin with, and they're going up even faster than North Carolina and the U.S. Here's zooming in within North Carolina. What you see here is the blue bar is the U.S. Metropolitan statistical area per capita gross domestic product average, and there's only 2 metropolitan statistical areas in North Carolina that are higher than the national average. Raleigh-Cary is slightly below it, and then you've got what is Greensboro High Point. This pattern you will see in almost all the geographic charts that you see on North Carolina. It looks essentially like this, where darker in this case means a higher per capita GDP. The urban areas clearly are much stronger than the rural areas. And again, I'm going to move pretty quickly on this. If you now turn to average annual wage, North Carolina is the last of the comparison states, is 27th overall, and is below the national average. I'm sorry I have depressing news, but it does get a little bit better. If you look at how these things have changed over time, North Carolina is increasing, but again, not increasing as much as the U.S. average. Here is a very striking chart, I think. If you look at wages for STEM occupations versus wages for all occupations, STEM occupation wages are almost twice as high as the wages for all occupations. And I'm sure Sam's data shows this in several places as well. And you can also see that the U.S. average for STEM occupations and all occupations is higher than North Carolina's average when it comes to wages. So those were all kind of the outcome indicators, but we've got about 4 other outcome indicators whether it's wages or per capita income or unemployment, North Carolina's ranking is almost always the same on those. We're middle of the pack or a little bit below average. The same pattern holds for a lot of these. If you look at total R&D, now this is a place where most people think North Carolina would really be a leader. But if you look at total R&D, we rank 24th, pretty much middle of the pack, below the U.S. average. And you would say, how could that be the case? Because we have such strong universities here. And that is absolutely the case. We do have such strong universities. But the vast majority of the R&D that occurs in the state is from industry or by industry, not the universities. And I'll show you that in just a minute. So if you look at how these things have changed over time, we are at least increasing faster than the U.S. average when it comes to total R&D. If you look at where the U.S. compares to other countries in terms of total R&D, a lot of people would expect us to be number 1 or number 2, but on a per capita basis or a per GDP basis, the U.S. ranks 8th, and the North Carolina would be probably 14th among nations. Now, this tells you a lot. Every blue dot that's on there is essentially a manufacturing establishment. And there are several thousands of these on there. You can't see all the different dots. But basically, 73% of all the R&D that occurs in North Carolina occurs in industry. And then of that, about 70% is conducted by manufacturing companies. It's impossible to get detailed manufacturing and R&D data because the companies don't give that out. But there are samples that suggest this. And the universities perform 23% of that. And the green dots are where the universities are located. If you take the 3 large triangle universities, they account for about 85% of the R&D expenditures in the state. If you add Wake Forest, we're up to about 93%. And then all the other universities in the state account for the remaining 7%. So here is one place, and this is a pattern that you see over and over in this index, is that where we are strong, where we are above average, is usually when it's something associated with our higher education institutions. So if you look at academic, science, and engineering R&D, North Carolina ranks 5th in the nation. The only state that's ahead of us among the comparison states is Massachusetts. The reason that Maryland is so high there is primarily because of Johns Hopkins. If you took Johns Hopkins out of the picture, it wouldn't be quite so high. And so we rank really high on this. And we're actually increasing at a rate faster than the U.S. average. But again, like I said, this is heavily concentrated in 3 or 4 universities. This is not unusual to North Carolina. And Jody Simone later in the day will talk about this some more. It's normal for things to be concentrated. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But it's important to recognize it and then to use that to the extent that we can to maximize our economy. So turning now to commercialization, there are lots of different measures of commercialization. We measure patents, we measure venture capital, things like that. I'm presenting here SBIR and STTR grants, which some of you know and some of you don't. SBIR stands for Small Business Innovation Research. STTR stands for Small Business Technology Transfer. These are 2 federal grant programs. Together they make up the single largest source of early stage capital for small businesses to develop new technologies and commercialize those. They're highly correlated with the technology development capability of a state or a region. And what you can see here is that North Carolina ranks 20th. We're below the U.S. average and below most of the other competitor states. But what's good news here is if you look at our pattern over time, this is one case where we have increased, well, the U.S. change has actually been negative. We have increased 48%, and our rate of increase is higher than that of most all the other competitor states. Now, there could be lots of reasons for this, but here's what I think the 2 reasons are. Number 1, in the early 2000s, the SBTDC, and Kim Mayer is here from the SBTDC, the Small Business and Technology Development Center, her shop created a position for an SBIR specialist, and that is a person, his name is John Uveri, and his job is to identify SBIR grant opportunities for North Carolina companies, to publicize those opportunities, and to help those companies apply for those grants. And so that occurred in the early 2000s, and then in 2006, the state of North Carolina created an SBIR STTR matching grant program that my office has administered, and that provides follow-on state funding to leverage the federal funding. And so, while I don't know if that's the exact cause for these numbers to go up, I'm going to claim those as the causes because because we had a hand in that. And so I think it really is, to some extent, the cause. And I think that points out that there are actions that we can take at the state level to change the trajectory of some of these lines and make them a stronger trajectory than they might be on their own. But if you look at where SBIR and STTR grants go in the state, and I know I'm a little over time, I'm about to be done, you can see the heavy geographic concentration. Probably 70% of them go again to the RTP region and then to other metro areas. But they are spread out across the state, but probably not as much as they could be if we had more resources to publicize those opportunities across the state. So now, if you look at innovative organizations, high technology establishments as a percentage of all the establishments in North Carolina. Again, we rank 24th. We're kind of middle of the pack. There's a trend here. You may be thinking that I cherry-picked these data to make a point. I didn't. The data on all these indicators are almost exactly the same thing. We are below the U.S. average, below the comparison states. We're going up a little faster than the U.S., but the emphasis there is on the word a little faster. And so, you know, it will take a long time to catch up to the rest of the nation at that rate. And if you look at the rate of formations of high-tech businesses as a percentage of all business establishments, we are negative, the U.S. is negative, and a lot of the states are very negative. And so we're below average, and we're not getting any catching up in really much faster. And so that's not good news. Now here's one case. Most of the trends that you saw don't change very much over time. This is one that does change very much over time. And the reason that's the case is because the Great Recession hit in 2008, and that really put the brakes on high technology business formation. Now these data only go up to 2008. My guess is that if we were to go up to the current year, you would see those lines going back up. But that's the most recent we could get the data. But it used to be that North Carolina was above the U.S. average on this. But we quickly went back down to the U.S. average when the Great Recession hit. So if you look at where high technology businesses are located in the state, again, you see that same geographic pattern where you've got essentially the I-40, I-85 corridor here, where most of it is highly correlated with population. Now, in presenting these data, I am simply diagnosing the situation. My job today is not to offer a prescription. My job is to give you the diagnosis, at least a selected sample of the diagnosis, and then in the groups we will start offering prescriptions on how to address this. So the final set of indicators have to do with education and workforce. If you look at individuals in science and engineering occupations, that's a percentage of all the workforce. We're closer to the U.S. average there. We rank 17th. But that's still not a great ranking. We're below almost all the other comparison states, or perhaps all the other comparison states. Actually, if you look at that, I think all the other comparison states are really high. So I just noticed that. So we are increasing at a faster rate than the U.S. average, but again, not dramatically faster. And so we're getting a little better, but it's slow moving. So we have another set of measures that will measure the overall environment and infrastructure, things like tax policy, the friendliness of government to business, things like that. Those measures are hard to get, but we're working on getting those, and so we will include those as well. Ultimately, this index should be ready in about another month from now. We will have it online at our website, which is just go to the Department of Commerce website, nccommerce.com, go to the Office of Science and Technology, and you'll be able to find this index. It'll be about 80 pages long, maybe 100 pages long. And in addition to presenting the charts, we will present a text summary of each of the charts. So for every indicator, we will say, what is this indicator, why does it matter, and how is North Carolina doing? But there won't be much prescription in there. It will mainly be diagnosis and allow the reader to make their own prescriptive judgments based on that. So again, these are the summary observations. I've already read those. You all may reach different summary observations, but these are the ones that I reach based on the data that I have so far and the data that we've studied over time. So I hope I haven't gone over, and thank you very much.
Thank you, John and Sam. Later this morning, we're going to hear our first panel that's going to react and discuss some of what they heard in terms of the science and technology pipeline. Right now, it's my pleasure to invite back to the stage Anita Brown-Graham, Director of the Institute for Emerging Issues, who's going to share a little bit more with you about why we're here today and the importance of the work this afternoon.
So the truth is, Sarah asked me back to the stage because I get to send you on break, but I have to send you on break with work to do. You know, when I mentioned to our board of advisors at IEI that we were going to be doing this Science Summit, one of the members, who shall remain anonymous, said, "Oh, you guys are doing another STEM conference?" And I realized, Todd, that I had not done you well. What he was saying to us, and what I had failed to articulate appropriately at that moment, were the goals for this summit. And I think as I send you off, it will be important for you to keep these in context. What Todd and colleagues and the North Carolina Science Festival Board said to us in asking whether we thought this was something that we should do was whether it would be, first, useful to have a contextual conversation with the people who are assembled in this room about the competitive environment in which this science and technology work takes place. And I'm really grateful to Secretary Decker and to Craig for setting that contextual environment for us. The second thing they said was, we need some folks who are all working on the same thing, but don't get in the room together at the same time to come together, to get out of their silos a bit. We need people like Sam, who are working on the educational inputs, and people like John, who are measuring the economic outputs, to be together in the same room, framing a cogent narrative about science and technology in North Carolina and the role that it will play in our economy in the future. And so I want to encourage you, here's the work, as you go out to break, to really talk to some folks that you don't know. I suspect everybody in this room knows a lot of the other people in the room. Find the person you don't know and strike up a conversation with them. The third thing that we heard was going to be very important was that this be a data-driven conversation. And so I want to give special thanks to the folks who have been working on these tools and these measures who allow us to go out and talk to policymakers and decision makers about the numbers. It's one thing to say in your gut you feel North Carolina needs to do more. It's one thing to talk about the kinds of investments that seem to make sense to us. It's another thing to be able to look at the kinds of numbers in the scorecard and the numbers that John shared, and then be able to hone in on exactly where we need to make investments. Encourage you to think about that. In your program book, you've got 4 primary challenges that the Pathways Partnership came together around. And then they determined that it wasn't just enough to talk about the challenges, but that part of what was important as a takeaway from this day together was that we all look at what some opportunities might be to respond to those challenges. What would be the priority opportunities? And we're going to spend some time this afternoon agreeing on what those priorities might be, and hopefully making some collective commitment to trying to work on those, so that next year when we come together to look at the numbers, we actually are looking at places where we have all been able to move the needle. So I do want to encourage you, if you haven't already done so, to look at your technology sheet on your tables, to go on to the Emerging Issues Commons, take a look at what those ideas are. If you don't do that from your smartphone while you're on break, we've got IEI staff ready to help you do so on the tables. This is really an action-oriented conversation. You don't get many opportunities to get this constellation of folks in the room together at the same time, and we don't want to waste it. We want to get out of here today feeling like we've taken one step toward the kind of science and technology infrastructure that we think North Carolina needs, so that our line, the green line, is ahead of the other lines on John's charts next year. So with that, I'm going to send you off to break. Sarah, how much time do we have?
Everyone can be back at 11.
If everyone can be back here at 11 sharp, we're going to start with a video. Thank you all so much. Did you go to the content? Thank you. Okay.